Welcome to the Danger Zone, the Terrible Infant Movies and TV podcast. This is Will, and we are here with Mike.
Hey guys, how you doing?
And Jim Jacobi, first-time guest. Jim has produced some stuff. He produced Traces, which stars Pablo Schreiber, and he was just telling me, I didn't know, Rick Springfield is in it. Is that correct?
Hell yeah.
And Kevin Bacon's daughter?
Yeah, Sosie Bacon. That's her name.
It just sounds like a brand of bacon.
That's her name.
And Hollywood Masters series, which you can see on Netflix, Jim was a producer on. And then a bunch of short films and other things like that. He has an MFA in film production, is that right?
That is correct.
And then works at Fox now in television production and development. And our topic today is one that actually I first ever talked about with Jim. And so it's a fitting thing to bring up today on the podcast. And it is most accurate / inaccurate war films, which I think it's a very tricky topic to talk about for a lot of reasons, one of which being, how do you define accuracy in a war movie? Is it that what you're looking at is the correct weapon and the correct tactic, or is it this movie creates a psychological environment similar to what you would experience?
Yeah, I mean, I imagine it's hard. I imagine the only way to like truly know if something's accurate is like, you know, say the movie like about SEAL Team 6 when they killed Osama bin Laden. I imagine the people who actually were there can tell you if it's accurate or not, and anyone else is just giving their estimated opinion. Right?
Well, and also if you've never been, I mean, none of us have ever been in a war, so
that doesn't help me.
I don't think we can definitively say whether something is accurate. It's more just based on what we've read, what we've heard. So one of the first movies I want to bring up here is The Hurt Locker, because Jim told me, whenever that was, maybe a year or so ago, that is like regarded as one of the least accurate war films in terms of the plot or the way that the characters work in the story. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it's not necessarily the plot. I guess the inaccuracies tie into the plot, but the biggest grievances that like the veteran community have with that movie is what Jeremy Renner's character does and like how isolated him and what is it, Anthony Mackie, and I forget the other guy's name. Yeah. With those three guys, like in their little, you know, unit in the Humvee, just cruising around Baghdad, like just disarming bombs. Whenever they just stumble upon one or they get a report of one, like that part of it, like their whole existence in the Iraq War in that movie doesn't exist in real life. There's no guys that are just these rogue units with just a handful of dudes that are just driving around. Like,
it would be pretty dangerous.
Yeah,
and they make a perfect target. You know, just three guys.
Yeah, I mean, it's always like it's like platoon level and above that go. So like at least 35 to 40 guys go out at any one time, and it's never like a smaller unit than that. When it's like, you know, the general combat infantrymen, you know, the special ops teams like the SEALs and whatever, that's different. But like obviously those guys aren't that in the movie.
And I imagine like, I'm sure they might have known that, but they're like, you know, we can't make this movie with 40, you know, with a whole platoon of 40 guys and cast 40 people, and it's like, we just want to focus on these guys.
He was an embedded journalist? Is that, am I misremembering that?
I think that's the case, but he was, I don't know if he was embedded with an EOD tech, which is what Jeremy Renner's character is. So EOD tech is a explosive ordnance disposal. That's the acronym stands for. Yeah. So it's the guys that go and disarm. You know, it started out as like landmines and stuff way back in the day, but that obviously has progressed into IEDs and things like that, and car bombs and whatnot. Like exactly what Jeremy Renner's character does. I think that's how Mark Bowl got the idea for the story. So I don't know who he's embedded with specifically, but because I don't think he has any feature credits before that, did he?
I don't think so.
Yeah, that's kind of his. So he busts onto the scene,
and he. Go ahead.
Is he still working?
Well, he did Zero Dark 30.
Did that like kick off his career?
Yeah,
or
he did Zero Dark 30, and he's got the story rights, or at least when the Serial podcast did their whole thing on the Bo Bergdahl, who was a Taliban POW for 5 years.
Oh yeah.
That the Obama administration traded 5 guys from Guantanamo to get him back. Mm-hmm. I think it was 2014, I want to say, when that happened. Essentially, Bo Bergdahl was in the army, and he walked off a base in Afghanistan, was captured by the Taliban. And he was an American POW in enemy hands for a little over 5 years, I want to say.
Yeah, I kind of remember that story.
And nobody really knew about it until he was released, because the big story was Obama, you know, sets free like 5 Guantanamo Bay detainees to get back a guy that abandoned his post. You know, that was the big contradiction or whatever. But anyway, so the whole podcast on that story came out, I think it was like at least a year and a half ago now. And Mark Bowl was like producing that podcast, or at least he was conducting the interviews with the guy. And I think he's got the exclusive like life rights to that whole thing. But that said, I mean, that story's been out in like the public domain for you know
a while,
like
right?
almost half a decade now, and nothing's happened with it. So I don't know.
We'll see.
But yeah, so
But it's a good movie, right? Hurt Locker.
Yeah, I mean, cinematically it's great, and like there's a lot of tension, and like the plot is interesting, the characters are interesting, but like just like or in the context of inaccurate war movies versus what do we define as accurate versus inaccurate. I was reading this is a couple of years ago now. I think it might have been when American Sniper was coming out, and I was reading a review of American Sniper that was written by a veteran, and he like was comparing the Iraq War that you see in American Sniper to the Iraq War that you see in The Hurt Locker. And that specific veteran writer was very, much more biased in favor of American Sniper and that whole portrayal of it. But he used a really interesting analogy for The Hurt Locker. He said the cowboyification of Jeremy Renner and his character and what they do in that movie is just not how any American service member's experience has been. Mm-hmm. It's just plain and simple, and that the whole, like we've been talking about, the cavalierness of them just going out on their own and doing kind of whatever the hell they
cowboys,
want.
Right? Just like roaming around
exactly,
in the desert.
And it's kind of like, everyone, like they see like an IED or whatever, and they kind of sit back, they call in the big shots to come in, and they're like rock stars. They come in, they do their own little thing, and it's like they ride off into the sunset.
It's like they come in like in Mad Max Fury Road with like the guitar player and like with the flaming thrower thing.
So you mentioned American Sniper, made me think of some other more recent war films about the kind of that area. One of them is Lone Survivor, which I know is Afghanistan, but I mean kind of generally like that. And then also, what's the Michael Bay movie about Benghazi?
13 Hours.
Is that a war movie, technically?
It's technically,
kind
yeah.
of?
It's military. It's like a movie about a military presence gone wrong in a foreign country. I mean, I count it. It contributes to the American wars, plural, in the Middle East. That's all part of the same.
So I don't know if you told me this or if I read this somewhere, but I heard that Lone Survivor was made, like, they took out some of the real details from Lone Survivor because they thought that people wouldn't believe it.
Yeah.
If they told the story as it was.
I was probably telling you that, yeah. So there's a lot of stuff in the book that Marcus Luttrell talked about, like the different injuries that he sustained, and he's still able to keep on going, for several days. And like once he got to, by the way, there's no spoiler alerts on this because these movies have been out for years. So if anyone's listening,
and also the movie is called Lone Survivor.
Yeah. if anyone is concerned about that at this point, then
we're probably gonna spoil Saving Private Ryan too. So
you're doing shit in the wrong order.
If you missed that in the last 20 years, it's your own fault.
But all right, so I digress. According to Marcus Luttrell's own account, like his autobiography of the book of the same name, Lone Survivor, he broke his leg in multiple places and screwed up his back because they literally fell down like a sheer cliff face, in the Hindu Kush Mountains, some of the tallest mountains on earth. And he was essentially like, it only turned out to be a temporary basis, but he was essentially paralyzed from the waist down. So when Mark Wahlberg in the movie, when he ends up on his own and he's still sort of like limping around and able to be up and upright, that's not how it happened for Marcus Luttrell in real life. He was literally like dragging himself through the mountains, just hoping to find
for how long
anything. So I want to say it was overnight the first day, so it wasn't like the same day. I think from the start, like from the first shot of the firefight until he got found by that one villager who ended up saving his life, I think that was like a 36-hour turnaround. And in the movie, it's like all in the same morning
it's like
/ midday
kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But like but how much do you forgive a movie because you can't obviously you can't make a realistic movie because at the time, like, you can't show someone crawling through the desert. And do you really want to watch someone just crawling, right? You want to root for them, so you want to see them like persevere.
Well, I
right?
guess it also like what's the audience? Because if you're like one of the movies that I always think of when I have conversations like this, which I've actually never seen, but is Active Valor, which is all those people are actually in the military, right?
Yeah,
in the movie.
We can come back to that one because I have a whole bunch of inside information on that.
But I mean, if you're
it's shitty, right?
It's not good.
Well,
yeah, that's why I remember.
Circle around to it, but like, if you're, so I guess if you're what you're so for to call upon a movie I know really well, because some of these are movies I've seen but I don't know a ton about. Apocalypse Now is one of my favorite movies.
Yeah.
And Francis Ford Coppola has said that he was trying to create for the audience an experience of what it would be like to be on acid in a war. So what he's trying to do is not accurately tell a war film, but to create an experience for people who don't know what that's like.
I think
so. Whereas
sorry.
Well, I'm just wondering, like, so that's like that. Knowing that that's the perspective of Apocalypse Now, I guess a lot of it comes down to when you set out to make a movie. Like the point of them making The Hurt Locker was probably not, can we make this super accurate? Whereas like with Black Hawk Down, isn't that something that they tried to do, like very specifically, like to make it an accurate representation of what the people went through?
Right. So. You both brought up like really interesting points that sort of go back to like our initial question. How do you define accuracy in this context? And I think it's got to be like a fluid scale, because those are two different types of war movies. Like a very precise dramatization of actual events versus, putting people in the mindset, to make them think like they, experienced something genuine that had to do with that conflict. Now, I would venture to say that the reason that a movie like Apocalypse Now can get away with it and Hurt Locker can't in that context, you're recreating the experience of it, is Apocalypse Now was what was it, 79, right?
Yeah.
So Vietnam ended in 1975. So we weren't still actively losing service members every single day. Now, Hurt Locker came out in 2007. That was right around the time of the first surge, I think, where shit started to get really bad in Iraq. 2005. So if you're thinking about, they're making a movie showing this dude who's just like an unrealistic cowboy going off, do whatever the fuck he wants, saving the day for everyone, and no one's getting blown up by IEDs in that movie, when in reality, every single day on the news, there's guys getting killed by IEDs that are going out. Like, I think that's the reason why a bunch of veterans don't like shit like Hurt Locker or Jarhead, which came out in 2005, which is very anti-military establishment if you think about it. And like a lot of veterans think, like I've heard the words said, like, Jarhead, it's an okay movie, but it's a bunch of bullshit.
Well, what's interesting to me about Jarhead is that I read that book. That book is really fucking good, and the book it's not like the movie seems to be like trying to be this like existential thing about like soldiers wandering around the desert, and the book is about like very like it's a very concise book, and it like attacks the point of like, we ended up here for like political reasons, and we were a bunch of young people in the military and we wanted to fight, and it goes into all the like Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, like how they were all involved when they were in previous administrations, obviously because this was in the 1991 or whatever. And none of that is in the movie.
I think though that obviously those specifics are not in the movie, but I think like the feeling of like this, these guys that don't even know that they're asleep at the wheel, like in the upper echelons of the military industrial complex, like Secretary of Defense, Vice, whatever, like that sort of mindset that shit rolls downhill, especially in the military, like the guys at the bottom are the ones that have to, rake up all everyone else's bullshit. And I think that all that, like the political dissension and everything that's in the book is sort of implied through these guys in the desert, not having anything to do and just fucking around with themselves, getting so wasted that they're getting, borderline court-martialed or disciplined in public and everything else like that. Because if it was a war or a military, endeavor that had a point and had a strategy, and an exit strategy especially, then there wouldn't be 500,000 soldiers in the desert in the movie just fucking around with their dicks in their hands.
Well, that's like kind of like we mentioned Black Hawk Down, and it's like it's a very unique film to me because it reminds me a lot of like Mad Max, where the new one, where it's basically it's a chase scene, right, in the whole movie. That's it. And Black Hawk Down literally is just like a long battle. Like the whole movie is basically a battle. And I can't remember any other war film that's just like that, where it's just like one specific event. It's like basically the whole. I think there's like almost no time in that movie where you're not hearing like background like gunshots and screaming and stuff. And it's like the whole movie's like that. And it's like a very brisk.
It's very visceral.
It's very visceral. It's very gritty. It's very like brisk. And
It's like that because it is a very historically accurate
so that's what I was gonna
movie, but it's also like because it's a historically accurate movie. That's what happened in Mogadishu in 1993. Like it was just a single day of these dudes that went in way over their fucking heads.
Yeah,
got the wind knocked out of them and had to fight their way out. And that's how Lone Survivor is too. You know, it's before and after the firefight, so it's not literally the entire movie, but that the Lone Survivor, the big like draw of that movie, like the Hollywood draw of it is the big action sequence in the middle. It lasts about 32 minutes, and it's from that like start to end. It's exactly what you're talking about.
That's like when they're rolling down the mountain. And
yeah, I mean it's the entire firefight, like the only action sequence of the movie essentially.
But these movies all have I mean, I'm circling kind of back here, but I was thinking about this as you were talking, and the Black Hawk Down and Lone Survivor and like a lot of these other movies we've been talking about have very realistic tones. And I feel like The Hurt Locker is interesting because it takes a ton of liberties, but it has a realistic tone. Whereas if you look at Apocalypse Now, there's no world in which you would take that movie literally because it's so surreal. And I wonder if that in Jarhead
it's also like a different era because like we had like the Russia Vietnam War movies and like now it's everything is in the Middle East mainly, and it's like the film I remember is damn it, what's the movie with what's her face?
Come on, Mike, what is it?
Who is it?
God,
tell us, Mike.
That woman who's in that stuff. You guys know what I'm talking about.
A recent movie?
Yeah.
Zero Dark 30?
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
We just talked about
what
that.
What are you talking about?
It's been a long time.
It was just in that movie. It came out in 2012.
That's just like a
it's relatively recent.
Yeah, it's relatively.
I mean, the big picture, but you were wording it like
yesterday.
This summer.
Yeah. No, but like that's a recent film when you in comparison to like Platoon or
Platoon's like 30 years old.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I mean. I don't know what my point was in all of that.
One, Jarhead is interesting because it has like those surreal sequences when like the oil rigs are burning, and is there like a horse covered in oil at some point in that movie?
Maybe. I remember that.
Yeah.
It has like some very surreal imagery, but then it has like very realistic sequences too. And it's kind of like caught in between.
I think that scene in that movie is like right when that guy gets like a videotape from his wife and she's like fucking somebody and he like leaves crying, and then I think
that is based on like the thing in the book where
it's
Anthony Swafford's the Jake Gyllenhaal character, but that's the guy's name in real life.
He goes back to watch it.
He talks about that in the book, like that exactly how it like plays out in the movie, like that incident happened and he was there, which is really fucked up. That's totally really like up, like I have friends in the military. Like my best friend that I grew up with is currently serving in the military, so I spent a lot of time with him, obviously, but like. Since he's been in the military, he's made his friends there, and like when we've, I've gone out to like hang out with him where he's stationed, he introduces me to like. So I've spent a lot of time around those kind of people, and like that, I can totally see that happening.
I just don't.
Not only in that fashion, but like in just way more like a raunchier version of it.
But
too.
I just don't get what the point of sending that tape is. Like,
are you talking about from the wife's?
Yeah, but it actually happened, right?
Yeah, but like in my mind, I can't see a point of sending the tape. Like. She's cheating. I get it. Like he's away. All right, whatever.
I think like
that's just fucked up.
To sweep this part of the conversation under the rug with like a huge broad stroke. I think that marriage is like hard enough as it is. Like when everyone's on equal footing, but when you throw like a combat deployment like with no end date in the mix, like that fucks a lot of people up on both sides. And like if it's some kind of career military person that has multiple of those throughout their life. I mean,
imagine not knowing if someone's going to come home.
Yeah, it's not just that, but like the military, like plenty of times for all throughout history, like you're supposed to go home on a certain day from a war zone. Like fuck, we need you longer. Sorry, like everyone is canceled.
You can't just fight for like 2 years and all of a sudden they'd be like the war's over. Let's see who won.
Exactly.
So let's count the chips.
So I guess bottom the whole point is Hurt Locker, not super realistic, but a good movie. Apocalypse Now, great movie, but not realistic at all. Black Hawk Down, fairly realistic.
Vietnam movies.
Yeah, you're just going back through the list.
Well, I'm just wondering the thing that
a Vietnam movie that's
really interesting to me is, which I think Jim really loves, so maybe we could talk a lot about this.
I hope you're not going to say Tiger,
I was gonna
because I have not seen that.
Platoon.
I was gonna say Tropic Thunder.
But Oliver Stone was in Vietnam, right? So
Yeah.
there's just kind of this element of like you can't tell him it's not inaccurate. No matter what anyone thinks about that movie, you can't tell him it's not accurate because it's based on his own experience.
Right, and I think
I love that movie. It's really good.
I think at the time that movie came out, like, because of what you just said about, you know, being inspired by Oliver Stone's own experiences, I think it was like it hit like such a raw nerve for people, because at that point, like, Vietnam, you know, had been over for 10 years, but let's face it, like there was no war to take up the, you know, vacuum after Vietnam.
Yeah.
There was, like, you know, shit going on with Reagan and the Mujahideen or whatever, but
You mean Rambo 3?
yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about.
Is that a war movie? How accurate is that?
The Taliban are the good guys in that way, right? Rambo teams up with the Taliban to fight the Russians.
They have to be, yeah.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah.
I remember he's on a horse and he kills a fighter.
What the hell were we just talking about?
Platoon.
Right,
it hit
Platoon.
a nerve because
It, like, even though all that stuff is just, you know, like some kind of, whether it's like exaggerated more or diluted down, it's some variation of a version of what Oliver Stone experienced in his tour of Vietnam. Apparently, like, that's supposed to be the thing about that movie, right? Mm-hmm. And to see, like, American servicemen talking about, like, fragging, which is, like, essentially summary execution, like fragging other guys in their same platoon, you know, like there's such a divide between them, so they're all fighting their own little wars, like, in the bunks, and then they go out on patrol at night, you know, and have to worry about getting, like, the one dude, I forgot the character's name, but this guy that's, like, he screws up his feet on purpose to try to get, like, sent home or whatever, like, he's always looking for a way out and trying to escape, and he gets put in Bunny, who's Kevin Dillon's foxhole at the end, and he's trying to run away, and he gets knocked out, but he gets woken up by a Viet Cong stabbing him with his bayonet. So it's like, you know, not only you got to deal with a bunch of bullshit and, like, it's like the most, you know, homoerotic, aggressive form of, like, teenage drama ever, that you're fighting in one place and then you go out at night and you have to worry about getting woken up with a bayonet in your stomach. Yeah.
Uh-huh. And I mean, like,
well, no, also like the existential question that underlies a lot of Vietnam movies is the fuck are we even doing here in the first place?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Oliver Stone, he was there, but he's also a filmmaker, so I'm sure in the back of his mind, he's thinking, you know, I have to make this film at least entertaining because he wants people to watch it too, right?
Well, he makes I feel like, I mean, back then, I haven't seen an Oliver Stone movie in a long time, but like a recent one, I mean, but I feel like he made very, like, almost like, I don't want to say old-timey, but like if you watch his movies, there's obviously like an element of someone who grew up watching like old studio movies, like classical great filmmaking.
Yeah.
And he makes like these big sweeping emotional like epic movies.
So I mean the whole Platoon is all narrated by Charlie Sheen's letters to his grandmother, right?
Yeah.
Like without like that totally, like, it's supposed to humanize everything and be like the, you know, what you were just talking about, like you know, have like this throwback to telling like a saga almost, you know, like this is how it happened start to finish, you know, according to my letters.
Yeah.
Well, it's almost like you know, it's like taking the tropes of like the heroic World War II movie, but then saying no, this is not that war, this is a shit show. I mean, I know World War II and a lot of elements was, but you know what I mean? Like, we have this image of like this epic, heroic conflict, whereas Vietnam is like this totally decentralized, like amoral, like chaos.
Yeah. Like, I feel like in World War II, it was like, you know, pretty clear, you know, Nazis bad, everyone else good. If we don't stop them, they're going to take over the world. And in Vietnam, it's just like a mess, and like no one knows what they're doing there. The Russians do stop them. Well, you know, the weather stopped them.
Rambo 4.
Yeah. They marched up to, St. Petersburg in the middle of winter and lost like 15 million people.
So
It's true stuff. Yeah.
That's exactly how it happened, too.
So if those listening, if you don't know, Mike is Russian.
It's exactly how it happened.
Born in Russia. not just like American Russian. And so were your people in World War II? Did your like grandparents fight?
Wait, was it you born in the USSR, right?
I was,
born in the Soviet Union.
Yeah,
Soviet
yeah.
Union, yeah.
Let's be.
Yeah, my dad's side of his family had people fight in the war. My mom's side, because my mom's Jewish, she had people die in the Holocaust. On her side, so
Jeez.
like yeah.
So you guys don't like Germans?
No, or Nazis. Well, I guess
Well,
not
does
Germans,
anybody
but
like Nazis?
well, I mean, I don't have anything against Germans. I don't like Nazis, but
Yeah.
not all Germans are Nazis.
Yeah, no, I know.
I mean, most, but not all.
Dang.
Snap.
But if
For the record,
if
that's not how
if the German
we feel.
government
I don't know if the
Arts Fund is
sarcasm is
listening-
coming across the
I
podcast.
want to fund our so
Fuck you, Pakistan.
before we leave Vietnam, just a couple more.
Some other good Vietnam.
Well, there's
movies.
Full Metal Jacket, obviously,
Yeah.
which I've heard is the concentration camp. Oh my god,
Start over.
the boot camp stuff.
Yeah, there you go.
With the exception of spoiler alert, the murder suicide part is very accurate.
That was the good part of that film to me. The
There's
second half
no,
in
like-
war wasn't very.
There's no exception though.
You don't think I mean, I don't know. I've never been to boot camp. I don't know a lot of.
I
people
haven't
in the
either,
military,
but like, there's attempted suicides. Like my buddy that's in the Air Force told me about. There was multiple when he went through boot camp. There's multiple attempted suicides for the Air Force boot camp, which is nothing like the Marines. First of all, especially not in the Marines
it's
in
just
time
like
of war.
Val Kilmer and Tom Cruise.
No, I mean, okay, so like boot
But
camp,
so
like,
then maybe
they
the-
still have to
the
learn to be
murder
riflemen. You know, like they
is-
still go through boot camp,
Yeah.
but it's just not as aggressively fuck you in the face as the Marines are,
I think
which is
that-
what Full Metal Jacket
That
is
movie
about.
was that first half of that movie was so good, and it felt really realistic because they got Arlie Ermy, and that was his first. I think that was his first movie, and he wasn't an actor.
No, he was a Marine drill sergeant,
Yeah,
just like
so
he is in the movie.
they just like we want someone for real, and literally they brought him on, and I read that he basically just did what he would do
yeah.
Marines, and like that's why it's like so intense and it's awesome. But then I remember the second half of the movie they get to the war, and it kind of just like I barely remember any of that. The second half of the movie, the first half I remember really well.
Well, it's because you expect it. It's a Vietnam War movie, so you expect it to be like Platoon. Takes place in the jungle and like
And it doesn't.
Mekong Delta and shit like that, but it doesn't because it takes place in Hue City, which is a huge like conflict area in the Vietnam War, and it was like up to that point in history, like there had never been such savage urban warfare, and like there hadn't really been any after that until Iraq, in 2003. Literally, like the Hue City, like the combat in like an urban environment, like that was like sort of like the benchmark for however many years it went on, 40 years almost, 30 years. So like that, it's not like the stereotypical Vietnam, because like Platoon sort of like, came onto the scene so strong that like everyone's sort of comparing any other Vietnam movie to like what that movie was, and the whole thing was in the jungle. So you look at boot camp and then just some Vietnamese city like where they're at a coffee shop and shit. It doesn't look anything.
Yeah, because you're right. You like when you do like at least for me when I think of a Vietnam War movie, I always think of the jungle. So I think of like Deer Hunter or Platoon or
Deer Hunter.
Born on the 4th of July.
Yeah, all these movies, and they're all like in the jungle, and they're all like they're dealing with like jungle rot and like wet weather and stuff. So a film where half of it's in boot camp and the other half is in the city, it almost doesn't feel like a Vietnam War movie, even though it obviously is.
And what are the other? I mean, you mentioned Deer Hunter, and then there's what was the Brian De Palma movie you were talking about?
Casualties of War.
Have you guys seen those movies?
I have not.
I saw Casualties of War, but for me,
I mean, I've seen the Deer Hunter. I've seen Deer Hunter.
Casualties of War isn't for me is more about like basically it's about like a troop of soldiers, American soldiers, and then like a small group of them, and they some fight goes on, and they capture like a Vietnamese woman who they think may be a spy or working, for the enemy, and they kind of take her with her, and they're like, basically torturing her and raping her and stuff, and Michael J. Fox's character is obviously the one who tries to pose them, and it's that conflict that happens between. It's like an interpersonal conflict.
Sounds unpleasant.
So it's pretty unpleasant film because like I guess spoiler alert, in the end she dies, and it's like not a happy ending at all. But you can imagine that shit like that probably happened, right?
Well, that's like I find that like a lot of the this is kind of a convoluted story, but a friend of my mom's is he's a history teacher in the UK. He writes like history textbooks. He teaches at like university and stuff. And he once told me that the most accurate war movie that he ever saw was Stalingrad, which is a German movie about Battle of Stalingrad. And he said the reason that it's the most accurate war film that he can point to, and again, he's never been in war, so this is more from the perspective of history and a historian, was that basically everybody dies.
Yeah.
And there's nothing happy about it at all. And that movie was actually one I was going to bring up when we got to World War II, but it's about this group of like friends from Germany who get I have no idea how the Nazi army worked. Were they conscripted or did they join or?
It could have been either.
And they get sent to Russia and like they freeze.
At that point in the war, most likely they were drafted.
Yeah. So spoiler alert: if you haven't seen Stalingrad, skip this part. But they all end up dying.
Yeah.
And like one of them kills himself. Some of them freeze to death. They die in battle. Like it's a really bleak movie. But it's also really well done.
Yeah. What's it called?
Stalingrad. I think it's just called Stalingrad. It's German.
That's what I was talking about earlier, where all the Germans marched up in the middle of winter.
Well, so what
through
about
Russia and Siberia
Enemy
for
at the
some
Gates?
reason.
I thought you were talking about South Vietnam.
No, I was talking about World War II.
Oh, that's why I was laughing at you.
No. In World War II, towards the end of it,
like when we're talking about Vietnam, we just jump in like
I just
fucking
slide
the
in.
Germans march.
Well, no, that's the whole.
Hitler wanted to get to Moscow, and for some reason, and they didn't.
For some reason, I think the reason was clear.
In the middle of winter, they just started marching, and what the Russians did is they started retreating and burning everything as they went back. So when the Germans advanced, there's like the towns have no food, nothing there, and like they kept going and going, and they finally got to like Stalingrad, which is a pretty heavily fortified city. And it's like the middle of winter, and they can't get any supplies or anything, and they just like started freezing and starving to death, and it was brutal fighting.
I read at one point that the Russian army was like it could sustain so many casualties that like the whole country of Germany would have to be fighting them in order to win or something like that.
Yeah, there's tales.
There was a million casualties in the Battle of Stalingrad.
Yeah, there was a siege, and the Germans basically
so
surrounded the city forever, and they sieged them.
Enemy at the Gates,
and
right?
The people in Stalingrad knew that they just had to wait till winter.
Do you really?
Then,
With everyone speaking in their own accents?
Yeah.
It's so confusing.
Who cares about the accents? That movie's awesome. I have the book that's based on it.
So is this movie accurate? Do you know?
I mean, it's based on a book called War of the Rats. And the book's a lot more detailed, and there's like this whole... the movie touches on their little, their camaraderie of, the Jude Law character and Rachel Weisz, and, they're...
That's the one that's, doing snipers, right?
Yeah. Ed Harris is the American...
The American
German wolf.
Jackson Pollock.
That talks with, old money Nantucket, right? It's he doesn't even talk with his normal voice. Some weird, hyper enunciated... Whatever. The movie is a very genuine representation of the story that the book tells, which is awesome. And when you look at it in that context, was it accurate to what the Russian people were going through in the Battle of Stalingrad? Fuck no. What did I just say? There was a million casualties in that fucking city alone. That movie's not anywhere near brutal and bloody enough to have it be accurate portrayal of the Battle of Stalingrad, including the siege and everything. So, but I think just, the microcosm of that little dueling sniper battle within the context of the Battle of Stalingrad, within the bigger context of World War II, when you look at it like that, I think that movie's fucking awesome.
Well, and just touching up, the point you made earlier about the population of Russia and stuff, I don't know if we talked about it before or read it in history books or whatever, but the Russian army had so many people, they didn't have enough guns, so every other person would get a gun. And the people without guns would march behind them, and then when the people with guns died, they just pick up the gun and go on.
That's how Enemy at the Gates opens. That's the opening scene.
And
Have you seen the movie?
I haven't seen it in years.
It's been
I saw it when I was in high school. Yeah.
But just the
opening of it.
Just the idea of that is just so fucked up. It's
and there's so many. The thing about World War II that's so insane is there's so many. It's not just that you have the European theater and the Pacific theater, but you have. People were fighting. And even within the Pacific Theater, there's the Battle of, Nanking, which is how many like thousands of miles from what's going on in like Burma with the building of the railroads.
Yeah.
Then you have St. Petersburg, right? And then you have like the Russians were, or was it someone was fighting with the Finnish, like on the border of Finland.
Well, I imagine
But like it's
Germans,
this completely
right?
isolated
the
like thing of the war, and
I
like
imagine it was the Germans.
and then
the
you have
Germans
like
had the Italians on
the
their side.
Blitz in London, and there's so much happening.
Yeah, in
It's
North
like-
Africa there was shit going on, and in Italy, I'm sure.
Yeah, in the
and
north, there's not a lot of movies about the North African.
Yeah, and it's like there's also all the fighting.
It's in Valkyrie, right? Tom Cruise
Yeah, I mean
movie.
that's like the opening sequence.
Yeah,
but
but
that's
it's
just
not the movie. It's just there's Casablanca.
Yeah,
But even as far as like England and France, there's fighting. Yeah.
I mean Lawrence of
in the
Arabia
beginning
too.
of
That's
it.
World War One.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Still counts.
That was
though.
just a big fucking war. It just covered everything.
and it's also World War II. It's like you have so many like subgenres. You have like The Bridge on the River Kwai, Guns of the Navarone, Great Escape type movies, right? And then you have like Rome, Open City, and Germany Year Zero, which are like Italian films. And Rome, Open City, they actually were making either like right after. I don't know if Mussolini was still alive, but like they're filming in the city as it's been like affected by the war.
Mm-hmm.
And the same with Germany Year Zero is the same director, and they went to Berlin and just filmed like in the ruins basically. And then you have Saving Private Ryan, Thin Red Line, like the stuff that came after that.
Inglourious Bastards.
Inglourious Bastards.
Hey.
Super realistic.
Yeah.
But I mean, I
Do our own
obviously
podcast on that one.
like a
Gets
movie
its own-
like I think Guns of the Navarone is not trying to be an accurate war movie; it's an adventure movie.
Yeah,
right.
Like the Magnificent what
7
7.
and like Where Eagles Dare,
Yeah,
and
like
like
films like
Hogan's
that.
Heroes and all those.
They're
movies.
very. It's about war, but they're very like
Sergeant York.
very sort of uplifting type of movies.
Patton. Is Patton accurate? I've actually never seen Patton.
I don't think I've seen it either.
And then
read
you have
the
films
book.
like Schindler's List, which is about the Holocaust, but
That so I
Is it
saw
really, Mike?
I saw Schindler's List when I was like, when did that come out? 94.
2, I think 92.
Wasn't it 3?
92.
Something
Wasn't the whole
like
thing
that.
about it that in Jurassic Park came
Same
out
year.
the same
That was
So it's
93.
not- it had to
I
have
was
been
10 or
93.
93. Obviously, I didn't see it when it came out, but I saw that movie when I was maybe in middle school. And I didn't remember anything about it. And then I watched it again like 2 years ago.
Yeah, it was 93.
And it's like it's like such a gigantic achievement that it's almost like impossible to conceive of. Like it's so
That's Spielberg,
long.
baby.
Well, that's the thing about like Spielberg has almost become this like.
Shit, he did that
Oh,
movie
God.
in Jurassic Park the same year.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it's like
fuck.
I feel like Spielberg has almost become this like
Such a beast.
like people will use the word Spielbergian without even really knowing what they're talking about. It's just like it's so ingrained in like the language of cinema that we talk about that people like. I feel like people aren't even really studying his movies anymore. They're just throwing out these words and like
Well, it's
assuming
like-
that they know what these. It's the
There's
same
like
thing
a
with Saving
Simpsons
Private
episode
Ryan.
about
Right?
it, yeah.
Like the narrative on Saving Private Ryan has become, the beginning is good and the ending is good, and then the rest of it is generic. But I watched that movie pretty recently, and it almost feels like people who are making that argument haven't seen that movie in like 20 years. They've just forgotten what the movie is, and they're like, "Oh, I remember those battle scenes."
Probably.
Yeah.
Because like
And-
there's the stuff where like in the pouring rain when Vin Diesel's character Caparzo gets killed by the sniper in like a clock tower.
That's the scene I was thinking. That scene is so good.
Yeah, I mean not just that, like the whole like the Paul
he's trying to
Giamatti like
save that French girl,
right?
right?
I don't want to like tell the story of like
Spoiler alert.
no, it's no bullshit like that. It's just like I keep telling the narrative of these movies through like the actors' names. It's like oh the Vin Diesel character, whatever. Like
I don't know the characters' names.
it's like them traversing their way through this like recently war-torn city that still has like machine gun nests and everything in place.
And that one scene when the wall collapses.
Just to like get to the other side of this shitty little village that's totally bombed out, but still like both sides are so deeply entrenched in it, just to find the wrong guy. And that's how the whole sequence plays out. So like, they get to the village, Vin Diesel gets capped in his ass, dies. They have to take the death letter from him. They get the sniper. Paul Giamatti takes him over. They go to a little courtyard. The beam falls. Ted Danson saves the day, right? Mm-hmm. The rain stops, and they go out and they tell Ted Danson, when you see one of your guys, and they come out, like, oh, your brothers are dead. And the guy's like, oh, my brothers are 6 years old. They weren't killed in combat. It's like, fuck, we got the wrong guy. So it's just like everything they had to go to just to like hit a dead end in that story. Like in that whole thing, I don't know if you know this or not, but that sequence in that early village, that's the same village in the end, like massive shootout scene, like in the big finale. They just shot it at like the other side of the town. So
or,
like all the angles in the big finale, like action sequence at the end, were shot just shooting, like literally the cameras were looking a different direction they were, and like the scene in the pouring rain when Diesel got shot, but it's the same set pieces, yeah.
And that's the other thing that I think is interesting about Saving Private Ryan, and we're getting off the topic of accuracy, but there's a lot of people who hate the bookends of like the people in the cemetery.
Mm-hmm.
And this is not something that I spent a lot of time thinking about, but I was thinking about it a little bit before we recorded this, and it occurred to me that like, because he says earn this, right?
Yeah.
Tom Hanks says that to Matt Damon as he dies, and then that fades to the cemetery, right? And that almost to me is a message that then carries across generations of because the Matt Damon's kids are there,
and his grandkids,
right? Yeah. So it's not just, oh, you go and live a nice life. It's like, don't let this happen again. Don't forget what we went through. Don't like it's. I feel like people see that movie and they think it's like, oh, it's just this corny statement of like, you got to go back to Iowa and keep the farm going. But in the context of all those generations being there, to me, it almost feels more like this plea to like, we fought because we believed in something, and what we believed in was peace and whatever, and like, don't throw it away.
Yeah, and look what happened a couple of years later after the movie was released. Like, if you, like that's really interesting. No, because I never really thought about it in that way. You know, where it's like Spielberg or whatever. You know, like that. The voice is not just earn your life, but it's talking to the audience. Like,
yeah, exactly right. Like,
yeah,
don't forget that this is.
And I don't think you can't like reasonably deny that either.
Well, and I think cinema is weird because, or movies, I guess if you want to be less pretentious, because it almost like inherently aggrandizes and like heroizes things. So how do you
heroinize?
Like Trainspotting?
Yeah.
So how do you get a message to people? Like, it's almost like that bookend is there, like you said, so that Spielberg could be like, this is not just like, even though you're watching it, you realize it's very brutal, and like I've heard people say that, you know, they did that whole thing when that movie came out where they went and interviewed vets who had been at Normandy and said that like, oh, it's the most accurate thing I've ever seen, and like it's
speaking to that, I wanted to bring this up. A good friend of mine went to go see it with his grandfather, who was the second wave at Omaha Beach. And the movie started, he watched the Omaha Beach scene, you know, that whole opening sequence, the big famous one in the movie. And my friend said his grandfather like kind of leaned over to him and said, I have to go to the bathroom, and went out of the movie theater and sat in the lobby and didn't come back in for the whole 2.5 hour movie.
Jeez.
And my friend, like, you know, went out and was like, you know, what's going on? He's like, I can't watch any more of that. It's crazy.
Yeah, I can't imagine. My family is, as you guys know, well, half my family is English. So they were more involved in. My grandparents were young enough that they weren't in the war, so they were evacuated. But my grandfather was a police officer in London, so he was like a watchman for the Blitz and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So the stories I hear are more about that than about being like on the continent and stuff.
Right.
So, there was one
Mike's
other movie.
giving us a signal.
Yeah, so there's one other movie I want to mention really quickly.
And there's a mini series I didn't even mention, but like Band of Brothers.
Yeah, I haven't seen that.
Oh,
I mean that.
But I mean, and the Pacific theater in World War II is like, you have all the Japanese movies too. So you have like Letters from Iwo Jima is an American movie, but you have like Heart of Burma and The Human Condition, and like and Ishiro Honda, which I mentioned to you guys via text when we were like working out what we're going to talk about today. Ishiro Honda directed Godzilla, and he was in World War II in Japan, and he actually, I think he was in China, and he was captured and then sent back to Japan through either Hiroshima or Nagasaki, and was there for a bit before he ended up back in Tokyo. And so a lot of Godzilla, like if you watch that movie carefully, like there's a scene where, you know, Godzilla has like radioactive breath. There's a scene where like this woman and her kids are like cowering, and then it cuts and you see like a shadow on the wall. And so there's all these like things where he's telling his war experience through Godzilla, which I think a lot of people think of as just like a silly monster movie, right?
Yeah.
And the Japanese cut is in the American cut, they put in an American radio announcer who's telling you what's happening in the movie. The Japanese movie is more of like a horror monster movie, where like it's just like you're just watching the monster like burn down the city. So, but I mean, that would be another example of, obviously it's not an accurate war movie because it's not even a war movie. But this is this guy telling his experience of being in World War II. So
I mean, that's kind of what we're talking about. Is like what can you say is accurate or not? I think like.
I guess it's all subjective.
Yeah, I mean, it's subjective to a point.
It's impossible to answer, right?
But like.
It's fun to debate, but impossible to say for
what
sure.
About active valor?
Oh yeah, so I got an active valor. So
tell us.
Apparently, the guys that were hired, the directors in the movie, the producers, what are the Bandito brothers or whatever? I think it's a directing team. Bandito. That's the production company. I swear to God, it's like 5 dudes in sombreros, like in a shootout. Like that's their company logo.
Okay.
Whatever. The directing pair, I think it's a team, like 2 friends or something, the director and producers. Essentially, the Navy contracted their production company that they run to like do a bunch of like these like high intensity action shorts for the Navy SEALs, right? Mm-hmm. Like all like, you know, fictional, like they're going to, you know, produce like an action scene with like, you know, explosions and gunfire, whatever. And they were all supposed to sort of, you know, loosely like be in the same narrative stream. Like all these little action sequences were sort of supposed to be tied together, like in the same universe. I think BMW did this way back in the day, like with Clive Owen and Guy Ritchie used to do it. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, didn't like Ang Lee direct one of them?
Yeah.
So they did like high profile stuff.
Right, and that's how like Clive Owen got into like marquee name acting. Like through those shorts.
It really?
I think because he was a professional race car driver.
Was he really?
I think so. I swear.
I didn't know.
Anyways, that's off topic. So anyway, the directing dudes like started shooting all this stuff, and they started to make the action sequences like way more like literally like successive in terms of like a narrative, you know, playing out. And then without like getting approval from the Navy or whatever, like they wrote a couple dialogue scenes that like you see in the movie, like these Navy SEALs going like to a bar and talking about the future of their kids' lives, like the most cliche shit you can imagine, right? Like in a movie like that, which the movie is okay, like because it has that stuff in it, because that's like sort of the expectation. You know, you're not expecting like a Jarhead type level dialogue and voiceover, right? So essentially, these dudes like you know, went behind the Navy's back and made a feature film instead of like a series of shorts. And the Navy liked it so much that they like are like, okay, like we don't care that you didn't deliver what we asked. And then they just got some other like massive like $100 million firm to commit to $30 million in marketing, and they released it.
And that's the movie.
That's why that movie is a feature movie that got released. Because it's really like in the movie, the plot that like sort of, you know, unfolds and like makes all these Navy SEAL events like happen around the globe. It's like the weakest fucking plot you can possibly imagine. There's like this Central Asian terrorist that's like on a cruise boat somewhere, and like the Navy SEALs like go and like land their chopper on it, you know, whatever. And then like he's got agents in like South America and London, or you know, so it's like the Navy SEALs are just like chasing down this terrorist all over the globe when.
Violating,
like that's not how it's not what they do.
Like,
and it turns out it's the villain from The World Is Not Enough. What's that James Bond movie with Denise Richards?
Isn't that it? Or Tomorrow Never Dies?
Robert Carlyle plays the villain, the Central Asian villain.
Yeah, one of those, yeah.
Yeah. Remember. So I'm just going to mention one more movie. We don't have to talk about it at length, but I would be remiss not to bring it up, which is Come and See. I don't know if you guys have seen that movie. It's a Soviet movie, actually.
I have not seen it. I've heard of it.
And it takes place in Belarus during the Nazi, like, kind of...
I heard it's just like super depressing.
It's really brutal, but it's really interesting because it's supposedly a very accurate portrayal of what happened in Belarus when the Nazis came through. Like the finale scene, and I'm not spoiling anything here, but the Nazis like burned down a village, and they built a village, like a traditional Belarusian village, and just burned the whole thing down. Like it's totally insane. And I think that guy only made one movie, and he's like, I achieved what I needed to achieve in my filmmaking career.
Just like Kim Il-sung played one round of golf, right?
Yeah, exactly. But it's an interesting movie because it's not a literally POV movie, but it puts you in like the psychological space of this kid who's like 14 or something when the war like arrives in his little town in Belarus, and they're living this kind of traditional like remote kind of life, and then the Nazis show up and bring like mechanized warfare to their culture.
It's kind of like what Defiance is about, if you've seen that Edward Zwick film with Daniel Craig.
Oh, I've never seen that actually, yeah.
I've seen it.
And that's based on a book. That's based on like real brothers, where it takes place in Belarus was what it was back then. Or I don't know how old Belarus is, but like
I think it's probably the same.
that whole like
that region.
Eastern Europe and Western Russia, that whole like heavily wooded area. It's about like these three brothers that were like Russian Jews. When the Nazis came and were doing their sweeps through towns, whatever, they basically like ran into the woods literally, and a bunch of other Jewish families doing the same thing. So they all kind of like huddled in the same spot and just decided to build. Like we have to survive somehow, and the Nazis are everywhere, like in every kind of local infrastructure there is. They're all over the towns and everything. So they just built this little cottage village thing in the middle of the woods, and it kept on growing and growing. And they literally had like a city of over 1,000 people at the height of it.
Yeah,
That's crazy.
it's just about there.
Is it good?
I think it's a pretty good movie. Yeah.
It was on Netflix, right? At some
Yeah.
point,
Yeah,
I think it came out in 2008. I want to say Edward Zwick directed it.
it was
Blood
good.
Diamond? Is that the same?
Hell
one?
yeah.
Is that a war movie? Kind of.
War of the Soul.
Is it the
Yeah,
Liberian?
yeah, I mean,
is it the Liberian Civil War? Is that where?
Sierra Leone.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, anyway,
On that note,
does anybody have any concluding comments?
Yeah,
Other
so
than-
basically, we talked about like things that we all sort of are on the same page on, but like essentially the moral of the story is that like there's no definitive like chart that you can say like this is what makes a war film accurate or not, right?
We're good.
It's like it could be historically accurate, and a veteran that experienced the same battle or firefight or whatever could sign off on it, but like if you have something like Saving Private Ryan, that's a totally fictional movie. But
before we recorded this, I have to tell them we found an article about like the most accurate war movies, and Saving Private Ryan was on there, and it was like, to be fair, Saving Private Ryan has some inaccuracies. For instance, Tom Hanks' character didn't exist.
yeah,
It's a fucking documentary.
fucking Captain Miller, the English teacher, didn't
Iowa?
really go and save Private James Francis Ryan and
Anyway,
Rommel.
yeah,
But
Anyway, so like
you're right, because
so Saving Private Ryan is like that's a fucking accurate war movie. I don't think there's anyone on earth that would like argue the contrary to that. But like, who's to fucking say that story ever did or didn't happen? But then Hurt Locker is a good movie, but a lot of guys that have been in the Iraq War and are still in the Iraq War think it's a shitty war movie.
mm-hmm.
It's not to say it's a bad film, but it's a shitty war movie for reasons that are very real.
that we talked about.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, you could be talking about one battle and two people have a completely different experience. Like if you're on the front lines versus like you're in a tent giving orders, a lot different, right?
Or if you're a typist.
Yeah.
Well, can we think of one universally, like, just, it's universally accepted that fill in the blank is an inaccurate war movie, like, just across the board. There's no, like, oh, they were just trying to recreate an experience, or, like...
Rambo 3.
That's not a war movie.
He goes to war!
There was one I was thinking of, and I can't... Is it the... John Woo did a war movie, right?
Wind Talkers.
Is that inaccurate? I don't know. I really like John Woo.
I mean,
it's based on actual
What about Pearl Harbor?
units.
Is that accurate?
I mean, Pearl Harbor got attacked. Yeah, it did get attacked.
Oh, U-571.
Is Matthew
Isn't
McConaughey?
that, well, because it's like Americans in a submarine, right? And they're trying to get the Enigma machine. Is that what it is?
Yeah.
But the Enigma machine was actually intercepted by a British boat or something like that. Is this true? I don't know.
I don't know if that story's true. That movie, I kind of like that movie.
But
I don't think it's a bad movie.
Like
No,
a movie like we mentioned, Inglourious Bastards, obviously inaccurate.
well, yeah, but
and I think that's the point.
That's the whole point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's easier to find an inaccurate film that's like based on like the Civil War or American Revolution. Like, The Patriot fucking obviously is inaccurate. Yes, that war happened, but can't imagine anything.
What about
that's in
the
that film
Green
actually
Berets
happened.
with John Wayne? Do you know this Vietnam movie?
Oh, yeah.
And there's apparently, it's like so inaccurate that there's a scene that he's watching the sun. It's either the sunset or the sunrise, and based on the geography of Vietnam, because it's over the ocean,
that'd be the sunrise.
It's impossible. Like
He's watching the sunset in Vietnam over the ocean because you can't do that.
Yeah, exactly. It's like so bad. That it's
John Wayne. He can
Dang.
do whatever the fuck he wants to do. But maybe people have ideas and can comment about what are some accurate war movies, some inaccurate war
some fan
movies,
mail.
and we'll be sure to check them out.
Okay, well, we can end on what each one of our individual favorite war movie is. Personally, not what they think the best one is, just your personal favorite. Mine's Saving Private Ryan.
I think for me, it's probably Platoon. I saw it when I was young, and I really liked it. And obviously, seeing a movie when you're young, it sticks out a lot more.
I gotta go with Apocalypse Now. I saw it when I was 18, and like when I was really getting into movies, and it like blew my mind. And then I saw it again years later when I was high out of my mind, and I was like, "Oh my god, this is the best movie ever made."
All three of those are good movies. Yeah.
But yeah, I love that movie.
All right. Well, you want to sign us out?
Well, thanks for listening. This has been The Danger Zone, Terrible Infant Movies and TV podcast, and we will be back soon.
See ya.
Thanks, guys.
And gals.